What it is, everybody. Thanks for joining me today. Thanks for tuning in on time. I have an exciting interview with someone who's always a great guest on this show, Ed Opperman. You might not know him. Not a lot of crossover necessarily between our two audiences. He's a private investigator, worked on the OJ case, I believe, and has been involved in investigating and prosecutions and convictions in many cases. I think you have something called emailrevealer.com, right? You're the creator of that as well, Ed?
That's right.
That's right.
Emailrevealer.com.
Yeah. So I know even about all the things that Ed does for his business. So he talks about he's a private investigator that's serious, works on all kinds of stuff, does that in his real time, and has looked into and is serious about satanic ritual abuse cases in particular. What are the other things you look into that are a little out of the mainstream?
Well, real quick before we get to that,
yeah,
I never worked as a PI on the OJ case.
Okay.
I just like everyone else, I was obsessed with it, and I watched it nonstop, and went on all the Usenet stuff like that. But just recently, a show that I've done, I did a show with the Dr. Fred Whitehurst, who's the FBI forensic guy. He worked on all the big stuff. He was going to be a witness in OJ, and I did an interview with him, and some people who are investigators for OJ contacted me, and they wanted a copy of the interview. They said there's something in there that's very, very important, and it's groundbreaking, earth-shattering, all this kind of stuff. So that's my connection to OJ.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I don't know why I got the idea that you worked on the case, but you have worked on some high-profile stuff, and I know in terms of this McMartin case, I'm really interested. Can you give people some background? There are a lot of things going on that are fake in the world, like this backyard brawl thing. Actually, those people you had on your show, Cowboy and Faith, I immediately contacted them after I heard your show, and I had them on this show to talk about the same thing because I'd been talking about that backyard brawl. So with stuff like that that's going on that's not real child trafficking or real ritual abuse, this is a case, the McMartin Preschool case from way back in the 80s, that was one of the first big, real cases of satanic ritual abuse going on at a preschool, right? And can you tell us the story about McMartin?
Yeah, this goes way back to the 80s. And it was really the first one of those preschool cases. There were a lot of cases back in the 80s, and when you look back too, you see later on that the preschools kind of got taken over by big corporations and nationwide chains and stuff like that. But the McMartin Preschool was in Manhattan Beach, California, like around San Diego, and it was 1983. And one of the kids came home, told his mother, "Hey, this stuff going on at school. I'm being raped at school." And a little toddler, but still, I think the woman's name was Johnson. And later on, she was discredited. They said she was an alcoholic, bipolar, and all this kind of stuff like that. But people who knew her never made that claim about her. This only came out later. And there was a big investigation. This wasn't some overnight hysteria or panic. The investigation went on from 83. The allegations were in 83. The investigation went from 84 to 87. There weren't arrests and indictments until 1987. Then there was a 3-year trial in this case. Now, 13 of these little kids had anal tears, bruising, and they had STDs. These little toddlers had STDs, and they told stories, and some of the stories were wild. They told stories about going down in tunnels and through hatches and going down and under the ground and stuff like that. All this wild stuff that sounded crazy, and it sounded like, well, it was impossible. So before there were even arrests or anything like that, one of the mothers, Jackie Maguli, who was like one of the main parents in this case, were confronting the McMartins. And this is before the school was closed. This is before any arrests. And they contacted Ted Gunderson, the former LAPD and LA chief of what's that called? The Los Angeles
the regional FBI director, right? Is that what he was? Yeah.
Right. Oh, he was retired at that point as a private investigator. They brought him down, and he brought in this guy who was a geologist. Last name is Michaels. And I did an interview with him. It's in the member section at OppermanReport.com. You can just go there and look at special archives. You can see a picture of it, the McMartin School like that. It's easy to find. Now, when he went down there and he brought his ground penetrating radar and he went up and down, he was looking for trenches, he was looking for tunnels, he couldn't find anything. And he says, well, what about this garage over here? And McMartin's told him, well, that garage doesn't belong to our property. That's the people next door. That's not our garage. So he came back and he reported. He says they were in hysterics. The families were in hysterics, and Gunderson pulled him aside and bought him a hot dog and some coffee because everyone was so violent in an uproar. And he says, well, I couldn't find anything. So people have been quoting this guy. If you look up McMartin, they bring up his name and they say, well, he went there and he looked, he didn't find anything. And some people even quote him as being part of the DA's team. He was a DA investigator that was brought down there by the district attorney and couldn't find anything.
Mm-hmm.
But that's all just, hogwash. It's just all stuff, urban legend that came up. So what happened was he didn't find anything. That's true, but he wasn't brought in by the DA's office. He was brought in by Gunderson. Now, later on, after the trial, because these guys were acquitted, okay, and we'll get into that, how they were acquitted. Later on, what happened was the McMartins couldn't pay their legal bill, so they turned over the deed to the property to one of their attorneys, and he sold the property to someone else. Okay, it was a real estate broker down there, and he went back to the property after they raised it, because they were raising the properties to build a dry cleaners. There's a dry cleaner on the property now. At one point, they were going to build office buildings there, but now there's a dry cleaners. And he saw with his own eyes, underneath the garage was a hand-dug room with a hand-dug staircase. It wasn't natural formation. It wasn't part of the original construction. This was someone had taken shovels and dug by hand a room with staircase underneath the garage. Now, that evidence is there. The evidence of that room, an underground room, a hidden underground room underneath that garage exists. And that's what I'm going after to go get.
Okay.
That's my plan now.
Okay, great. And so everybody understands exactly what the story is. These kids who came home, complained of these insane things happening, which it was satanic ritual abuse. Is that right, Ed?
Well, absolutely. Yeah, they found pentagrams. The kids talked about pentagrams. The allegations that Aquino was involved in this, and even the tunnels that Ted Gunderson found. Ted Gunderson and Jackie Maguli actually paid for it. They hired an archaeologist that around that same time that they were raising the properties, and he found tunnels. He found underground tunnels that had been filled in with backfill. There was different kinds of dirt. There was garbage in the dirt. There was obviously not the original dirt. There was plumbing underneath the ground that had brand new fittings on it. Like if you had dug out a tunnel and you're walking past the toilet that was dripping all the time, you'd say, oh my God, we got to fix this because it stinks. We got to fix it. If it's underground, who cares, right?
Right.
But if you're walking past it all the time, because this is the 6-foot-high tunnels they found. They changed the fittings. You can see brand new silver fittings on these pipes under there. They found bags from Disneyland with dates on it that were inconsistent with the construction of the property. And they found pottery, turtles, because the kids talk about turtles and stuff being sacrificed. And there was pots and cauldron. They found a cauldron down there. So all this stuff was found under there.
So they found that stuff. The kids said there were tunnels. There were tunnels. Gunderson came in, and there are some questions about Gunderson, actually. But Gunderson came in and found these tunnels, and that was all before the case. And then how was that evidence dismissed?
None of that evidence was used in the trial because this was after the trials were over.
Gunderson found the tunnels after the trials were over, too. Yeah,
right. And if you want to get into the whole thing about Gunderson and his problems, that's how I first learned about Gunderson's problems, because Jackie Maguli was one of the mothers of the victims in his case. And she entered into a relationship with Gunderson where he was actually living at her home. And she told me, this is way back in 1997, 1996, I talked to her way before I had any kind of radio show, I think. And she told me, she says, she was mad at Gunderson at the time. And she says, yeah, every single day he talks on his cell phone to Michael Aquino. And at the time, I was an admirer of Gunderson. I liked Gunderson. I had very good relationships with Gunderson. We had no problem whatsoever. I respected him. He was my elder. He was FBI special agent in charge, it was called, with the LA district. He's a big shot, in the PI world, And
right.
Plus, I wanted him as a client, as well. I wanted to do business with him. And so she told me he was talking to Aquino every day on the phone. And so from my attitude was of respect for him, I said, well, why was he doing that? And she says, well, to make himself feel important. Is what she felt. that it was, is what she told me. And it wasn't until later on you started hearing all these other allegations about Gunderson that caused me to relook at the situation. And then I had a client just recently, before Gunderson was dead, before he died, and she told me, because she had a case going on in California there, and she says, yeah, I was down at the FBI office there in Los Angeles, and I ran into Ted Gunderson. And I says, well, what was Ted Gunderson doing there?
Right.
And she says, he was working there. So according to her, this client, who has no reason to make this up, she's not involved in any of this kind of stuff whatsoever. She's told me that he was still working at the FBI office years after he had claimed that he retired. Now, I got another little thing for you. And I don't, you listen, I'm just telling you what I know. I can't tell you I have facts that Gunderson was, by the way, too, he was COINTELPRO. People talk about COINTELPRO. The FBI LA office was the real COINTELPRO. That's where it existed. That was where it was created. That's where it went on against the Black Panthers. That was the real COINTELPRO. The people talk about it now that everybody's COINTELPRO, but the real FBI COINTEL program against the Black Panthers and stuff originated out of Ted Gunderson's office. He was in charge of it. So what happened was, when I was working with Art Bell, okay, and I was helping Art Bell to negotiate a settlement in his lawsuit against David Oates and Robert Stevens, another lawsuit came up where Art Bell was suing Ted Gunderson. So I had helped him settle his lawsuit with David Oates. I had negotiated a settlement in that. So I thought I was doing such a good job. Let me call Gunderson and see if I can negotiate a settlement here. And he told me at the time, he says, no, Ed, I'm not worried about that lawsuit. A guy didn't do anything wrong, first of all, but my insurance company is handling the lawsuit for me. So I'm not concerned. And my errors and omissions insurance. See, when you're a private investigator, you have insurance called errors and omissions, the E&O insurance, errors and omissions insurance, that if I write a report and I make a mistake or I leave something out and somebody gets killed or there's a lawsuit, whatever, I'm protected because you got insurance. So he told me that this statement that he had made on the air was covered under his PI insurance. And at the time, I just accepted it because I didn't know anything about radio back then. But I know now, and I know now that my errors and omissions insurance isn't going to cover anything I say on the air. I'm up the creek. Maybe homeowners insurance might cover it if I said that I do a radio show from my home, like what's that guy, Webster Tarpley found out. But otherwise, my errors and omissions insurance isn't going to cover that. So he lied to me about that. He had some other insurance policy that was covering that lawsuit for him.
Wow. Yeah, it's really interesting. And do you think maybe he had something to do with kind of covering up the McMartin case or throwing people off the scent? Or
I have no firsthand information or even firsthand allegations that he was throwing things off, that he was running interference in that case. But I do have suspicions that he was running interference in the Jeff McDonald case.
Oh, I'm not familiar with that case. Shoot.
There's a movie about that one too, and don't let me forget too. We have to talk about the movie about McMartin too that James Woods was in, because that's important to this whole story as well.
Okay.
But the same thing happened with Jeff McDonald. He was down on the base down there in Fort Bragg, which was that base too, by the way, where they were bringing in the heroin from Vietnam, the whole in the body bags thing. And Colonel Aquino was stationed on that base around this time.
Interesting.
Right, and very few people know that, or even talk about it. I stumbled on it. And what happened was Jeff McDonald was a doctor on that base, and his family was murdered. His wife and his two little kids were murdered. They were stabbed with an ice pick, and he claimed it was hippies who came in and did it. Like the Manson family came in and did it. And that chanting "acid is groovy." You never heard of that case?
Never heard of that. Interesting.
Yeah, that's right up your alley. You'd be fascinated by it. Yeah. And so the thing is Ted Gunderson retired from the FBI to go work that case. It's the first. No, I can't say that. But it's the first case he worked after retiring from the FBI. He went to work on the defense for Jeff McDonald, and he found a witness. Shapley was her name. It was called The Girl in the Floppy Hat. She was a hippie. She was seen in the streets, and she was one of the people who claims that she was in the house doing the murders. Because Jeff McDonald, the doctor, wound up getting convicted. He's in prison right now for this. So, and Ted Gunderson, man, found this witness and totally controlled that witness. The only videotape of her testimony is Ted Gunderson's videotaped interview. You could find it on the internet. So I'm suspicious of that. That he controlled the only witness who wound up never testifying.
So, going back to the McMartin case, the tunnels were found after the fact. Ted Gunderson brought somebody who looked for tunnels with, underground penetrating radar, didn't find any, and a lot of people say that that's vindication that there really wasn't any of the satanic ritual abuse. But there was this evidence. There were kids with STDs. Kids who came up with the story spontaneously. On their own. They weren't coached. So how did they get off?
You know what happened? Because the trial was going on for so long. There was a couple called the Eberleys, okay? And they were involved in child pornography and all this kind of stuff like that. And they came up with this theory that it was political. There was the prosecution against the McMartins was politically motivated, and they even wrote a book about it. And who came out and heralded that book? Dershowitz, Alan Dershowitz. He says, from now on, we have to take a second look at all these allegations, these preschool allegations of child molestation allegations, because they're all fake. You can find that on Wikipedia too, his exact quote. But it's interesting now that he's accused in the Epstein case and running around defending Trump all the time.
Yeah, right. And I want to get a chance to talk about Trump and Epstein for people who aren't familiar with that. People who are still on the Trump train. So so anyway, you had a book, I guess, come out. Yeah, Dershowitz saying that it was baloney, and then you had a movie come out too, right?
Yeah, the Eberleys came out with the book, and then who comes up with the same theory as the Eberleys is the man, Abby Man and Mira Man. Okay, and Abby Man, he did a book about the Holocaust, a movie about the Holocaust that won Academy Awards. But then he went on to do a lot of Kojak and stuff like that. He never really did anything big. But he made this movie. He was the producer and the writer, Abby Man and Mira Man. Before they made the movie, they actually went to work for the defense, the McMartins' defense. And they were part of this plan that one of the prosecutors in the case resigns from the prosecutor's office and sold his notes to the Mans for $1,000 and 5% of the book and movie rights that they were going to do. Okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, you'd think that would be unethical, wouldn't you?
Yeah, right.
You'd think so would raise an eye at that, right? But no. He resigns from the prosecutor's office, goes works for the defense, gets paid by them, and turns over his prosecution notes during a trial.
Crazy.
Yeah, and then the Mans used their Hollywood connections to arrange an interview with 60 Minutes. 60 Minutes did a segment with all the McMartin family and all the people who worked at the preschool, a bunch of little old ladies that looked so innocent. And the first scene was they pan around the room, and it says, "Do any of these people look like child molesters?" Ha 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 ha. Yeah, and you know where that was filmed? That was filmed in Abby Man's home. In his Beverly Hills mansion, they filmed it there. So the Mans came in with their Hollywood connections and changed the whole story. And they did this movie called Indictment with Oliver Stone was one of the producers, although his name is not prominent in the production of it. And Oliver Stone was contacted, by the way, by Alex Constantine during when he first was getting involved in this. When he first announced he was going to do this, Constantine contacted, told him about the Everleys, told him about the Mans, and Oliver Stone went ahead with it anyway. I confronted his son, Sean Stone, about it, and he says, "Oh, well, yeah, I know, Kino's a bad guy." And he says, "Well, what do I had Doug Dietrich on my show, and Doug Dietrich hates Aquino too." I think that was his bona fides, that he had Doug Dietrich on his show. So, what do you call it? But and who was the face? Who was the big star in this HBO made-for-TV movie? Woods. James Woods was the guy who played the lawyer in this movie. The front man for this movie, the face, the PR agent for these McMartin rapists was James Woods, and Oliver Stone put this movie out. And then now you have James Woods running around trying to tell us about Pizzagate and all this other stuff, and about defending Trump, and about these kids being put in cages down there at the border. James Woods is making excuses for that. He comes up with this convoluted theory that somehow it's Trump doing four-dimensional chess, and that Trump now if you you try and traffic a child across the border, they're going to check for DNA. They're going to be both held in the same cell, and we're going to be rounding. We just put an end to human trafficking, according to James Woods and his rabid followers of QAnon and all those other characters out there.
I've been talking about QAnon, and kind of we're linking up a few things that end up tying to Trump a little bit. As James Woods is kind of a conspiracy theorist for Trump. I've been talking about QAnon, and believe it or not, it's getting even bigger right now. But then Dershowitz also ends up having connections to Donald Trump as well, and as far as that border stuff, you were mentioning, I think it was on your show, everybody points to Donald Trump signing an executive order, which they say has to do with stopping human trafficking. You were saying something about that. You objected, I think.
Yeah, he came up with this human trafficking. Let me see if I have the title of it here. I do. Executive order blocking the property of persons involved in serious human rights abuse or corruption. Okay. And then I got a little thing. It says, I, Donald Trump, President of the United States, millionaire. I don't want to mention any yet. Define the prevalence and severity of human rights abuse and corruption that have their source in whole or in substantial part outside the United States, such as those committed or directed by persons listed in the annex to this order.
Right.
Reach such a scope and gravity that they threaten the stability, blah, blah, blah. He's going to hold them accountable, right? If you Google everybody, and people, when this came out, people says, he just released an executive order to go against human traffickers. The word human trafficker is nowhere in this order, okay? And he talks about the names such as those committed by those persons listed in the annex. There's an annex there of about 20 people listed there. They're all foreign people with Indian names and stuff like that. But you can Google them. They're easy to find. Not one of them has a single thing to do even remotely with human trafficking. The closest was that they were stealing and selling organs, human organs, but it had nothing to do with human trafficking or sexual trafficking or anything like that. But this crowd, man, they take this and they well, here's the proof that Trump's rounding up elite pedophiles. It's all there. You know? Yeah,
I know. And let's get into that next. We'll get into Trump Epstein. Let me just because the reason you're on the show, so it's clear to everybody. So after the trial, they find these tunnels. Gunderson finds tunnels, but also has a survey where they don't find tunnels. Then they go to sell the house again after they've already been acquitted. And somebody else goes there and goes to this unsearched garage and finds hand-dug tunnels in there that really give proof now because somehow they discounted the tunnels I think Gunderson found. But this would be proof from somebody who was there that the tunnels really existed. And that proof is there, right? Is that my understanding of it? I think we talked about it last time. Like you can go pick that up.
Yes. Right now we have legitimate proof from a genuine geologist, with a degree in a house in Malibu, genuine guy. We have his statement. We have a statement on my website now. The tunnels have since been, the room underneath the garage has since been filled in. But there does exist. First of all, there's another witness too who saw the tunnels. Okay, I got to get a hold of him, who I'm trying to convince him to write a statement for me. But there's another witness who owned those properties who saw that room underneath the garage. But there exists government grading and building reports that will show that that this hand-dug room existed underneath that garage. And if you listen to my guest Michaels, there is no reason why there would be a room. It's not safe to dig a room like that underneath a garage. It's like limestone or sandstone in that area. It's not safe to hand dig a room. It's uncommon. It's not like that's how they did it back in the old days in that neighborhood. No one has a basement in that neighborhood at all, not much less a hand-dug room, but a hand-dug staircase. So yeah, that evidence exists.
And what you were mentioning, raising some money, I think, to get down there and pick it up. Is that my understanding of it? So
I've tried to get some people to get this for me, and either some people forget it, they're hopeless, but some people or either tell me, yeah, it's there, and then some other people tell me, no, it's not there. So I got to go there myself and see this myself. So we're making a trip out there within the next 7 to 10 days. If you want to support this effort, you can go to OppermanReport.com and just become a member. And what this show I'm telling you about with Michaels, the geologist, it's in there, so you can purchase a membership. I'll give you a deal, too. If you contact me directly, at oppermanreport@gmail.com. I'll give you 13 months for $60. And we would only need about 10 memberships to finance this little trip back and forth so that, when I get back, my rent's due when I'm not homeless. You know what I'm saying? I'm not living in a tunnel. I'm not living in a hand-dug basement under somebody's apartment.
Well, that was the feeling I got when I heard you talking about it. You were like, oh, nobody cares anymore. And so this is a really important case. And what you're talking about getting, because I remember we talked about it on our last show, what you're talking about getting is hard government evidence. It sounds like that this stuff was real. And you can take that against all the ways this was theoretically debunked, and you have something that stands up. And Ed has evidence like that, and like your interview or your statement from the person who saw it, which is in your subscriber section. So that's OppermanReport.com, and email edopperman@gmail.com, and you'll get a deal on it.
The email is oppermanreport@gmail.com.
I'm sorry, oppermanreport@gmail.com. I'm sorry, and oppermanreport.com. And before we move on from McMartin, the other thing that they came up with was the False Memory Syndrome Institute.
Right. Yeah. No, it's just false memory syndrome. Incorporated.
You know what
I mean? It's not even an institute. At least they could have bought a building or something, right? They came up with this wild theory that little children have false memories of being abused, which flies in the face of every I've had so many doctors on my show talking about. We just had one recently. I think you, Colin Ross. What a guy, man, talking about this kind of thing. So it just flies in the face of every professional I've ever had on the show. But they came up with this false memory syndrome incorporated. And this thing is, at one time, they got very popular, and they were being used in testifying in court and stuff like that. With this theory, the kids make this up. The kids somehow make up these crazy stories about being taken to a black room and being molested by Satanists and satanic ritual abuse, which I don't think we've ever seen any evidence that's gone on.
And there is no such thing actually as false memory syndrome, right? They just made up.
Yeah, it's not a medical term for sure, no. And the guys too, with the guys who run this group, one of them says some kids enjoy sex and some kids enjoy being molested. I think his name was Wagenen or Van Wagenen or something like that.
Oh, wow. So you had some sketchy characters involved with it too. It sounds like it was sketchy characters all around, including Dershowitz. What? Moving on to sort of Trump and some of the characters around, and Epstein and Dershowitz. What do we have on Dershowitz that we know? Why do we know that he's a bad guy? He's involved in defending what's her name? I just forgot his madam, Maxwell. Isn't Dershowitz involved in that?
Yes, in a way. Well, not directly. What happened was Dershowitz was named. His name came into the whole Epstein case because Virginia Roberts, who was the main plaintiff in these cases. Virginia Roberts was a little girl. She worked for Trump at Mar-a-Lago, in his locker room, the ladies' locker room, folding towels, as the story goes. Her father worked at Mar-a-Lago. He was the head of the maintenance department. You know what? I say he's the head of the maintenance department, but we know he was in the maintenance department, and we know now that he's retired on a horse ranch. So Virginia Roberts was targeted by Ghislaine Maxwell, who was the daughter of Robert Maxwell, that famous Mossad agent, not Mossad agent, I think it was Mossad and MI6, and he was involved with all those tabloids in England and stuff like that, and stole a bunch of money before he died. And his daughter, Ghislaine, was a helicopter pilot, kind of a manly woman, but she was Jeffrey Epstein's girlfriend and pimp. She used to procure these girls for Epstein.
Right.
So she found him and found a Ghislaine Maxwell, who now goes by the name, she found a Virginia Roberts, who goes by the name now Virginia Goo-Free, because she married some guy.
Right.
Overseas to protect her, guy's like a karate expert, karate champion. And she delivered her to Epstein, and Virginia Roberts testified in one of her many lawsuits. Because by the way, this isn't a he said she thing with Roberts and Epstein. Epstein pled guilty to his charges of molesting Roberts and several other girls. So there's no he said she said. Her lawsuit was against the state of Florida for giving him a sweetheart deal and not warning her about the deal. And in those lawsuits against the state of Florida, against the victims board down there, whatever it's called, she mentioned that one of the people involved in her molestation was Dershowitz, Alan Dershowitz, and that while she was one day on her knees servicing Epstein, Dershowitz was so casual with all this and so used to seeing all this that he walked in and casually had a conversation with Epstein while he was receiving these oral favors from this little girl, this little slave. So, that's Dershowitz. That's how his name first came up in this. And then he got all upset and he filed a defamation lawsuit against her attorneys. And they settled that quietly, And he wanted some. There's another lawsuit that was settled also, too, again in Robert's favor with Ghislaine Maxwell. I think that was a defamation lawsuit as well. And there was all kinds of information that was bubbling underneath the surface. And Dershowitz filed a friend of the court motion in that, trying to get information released. And then when he was thrown out, he had that guy Cernovich file the same exact motion, almost word for word, trying to get this information released and made public on Dershowitz's behalf. Because he was in the media. He could do it because he was in the media, and he wanted this for the Sunshine Law down in Florida.
Yeah, I remember that because I covered it. And Cernovich is an interesting character. And yeah, it was really interesting that Cernovich is actually kind of friendly with Dershowitz, and there were pictures of him from back when as well. And then he filed basically the same motion as Dershowitz did, which was trying to unseal some information about the defense's statement, I guess, about Ghislaine, is that the other one? The victim in the case, Virginia. About Virginia, yeah. So as far as a connection to Trump now and Epstein, you have this connection where the victim was actually working for, and her family, I guess, were actually working for Donald Trump, right? And how did Donald Trump and Epstein know each other?
Well, according to Trump, in the Vicky Ward in the New Yorker article, when Epstein first popped to the surface, when he was found on the plane there, he was giving Bill Clinton a ride on his plane to an AIDS conference in Africa, and that's how Jeffrey Epstein popped into the news. And so Vicky Ward did an article about him. By the way, it's interesting, too, that on that plane with Clinton and Epstein were Kevin Spacey and who's that guy? The black guy who was on a plane. The black guy had his own plane, too, and he was flying around Michael Jackson's victim, Gavin, that boy.
Oh, I'm not sure.
Chris Tucker.
Chris Tucker. Huh, weird.
How weird is that? Chris Tucker has his own plane, and Michael Jackson calls him up and says, when that whole story came out about Gavin, that little boy that was sleeping in Michael Jackson's bed.
Yeah.
He says, "Oh, go grab Gavin and fly him to me and where I am here." And Chris Tucker just goes on a private plane, picks up the kid, and takes him to Michael Jackson. And he's testifying for the defense in this case, in the Jackson case. But anyway, it's never mentioned that on that same place was Kevin Spacey and Chris Tucker. Two guys with shady connections as well, along with Clinton. And by the way, too, I have a 24-page letter from Jeffrey Epstein's defense where he claims that he was part of the creation of the Clinton Foundation, that he was helped create it and found it.
Oh, really? From Epstein, huh?
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Yeah. And so, but his connection to Trump, when this came into the news, Vicky Ward did an interview, or did an article about this, and she talked about how she has a quote from Trump booming over his speakerphone about how he and Jeffrey Epstein were great friends for 15 years, and he really likes the ladies. A lot of them are on the younger side. People say he likes ladies, beautiful ladies, as much as I do, and many of them are on the younger side. Jeffrey sure likes to have his fun. Okay, so that's a direct. This wasn't a secret. That Epstein was involved in this kind of stuff, because Vicky Ward, and that article is available online too, the Vicky Ward article about Trump and Epstein, that there were parties in Epstein's mansion where he would have like a bunch of young Eastern European girls, like 13 years old, dressed like prostitutes in the middle of a regular cocktail party. So his behavior was well known. He was hanging out with this Jean-Luc Bernard, this modeling scout who had his own nefarious background, his reputation of drugging young girls and raping them, date rape, drugging. And he went to visit Epstein in jail more times than there were visiting days. So he visited him at least one. He visited him every possible visiting day. And there was only one visiting day because he was only there on the weekends. You know, so he visited him every single visiting day plus one day more. So he visited him twice on one visiting day.
Wow.
Or they let him in on a day that wasn't a visiting day. They let him in at night. Who knows?
Right.
So yeah, there's all that. But there's also too an article came out in a golf magazine. We know for a fact from a deposition of Jeffrey Epstein's brother that Trump flew on Epstein's plane, the Lolita Express. Everybody likes to call it the Lolita Express, right? And by the way, when you hear either Pedophile Island, because Epstein owns an island down in the Virgin Islands, when you hear Pedophile Island or Lolita Express, your ears should perk up and just consider that the rest of that story is going to be bullshit, okay? Because they want you to think that everything went on in some plane and that everything went on in some island far away and that this stuff didn't go on in New York City and that this stuff didn't go on in walking distance from Mar-a-Lago in Palm Beach, Florida. That's where these crimes took place. So, and there's a whole Mossad running interference for Epstein as well. As a matter of fact, one of these books that's about Epstein that supposedly exposes Epstein and gives Trump's a clearance on the allegations is published by a Mossad agent named Ostrovsky. Okay? And this isn't my imagination because he called me up and told me. Okay? He called me up and told me, I'm a Mossad agent and I published this book. You should read my book and have me as a guest on your show. I wrote a book about deception and how to use deception as a Mossad agent. Okay?
Wow.
All right?
That's
so,
interesting.
but there's many connections. Not only was we know that Trump was on Epstein's plane because Epstein's brother did a deposition, so we know that Trump was on Epstein's plane. We also know that Epstein flew on Trump's plane at least once because there was a golf magazine writer who was on the plane with them and wrote a story about it. And he said that when Epstein came on with Ghislaine Maxwell, they brought a little teenage girl with them who was dressed up to look older. He says, well, I don't know if she was underage, but she was really young and she was dressed up to look older.
Oh, weird.
So this was going on under everybody's nose. There was one more thing, too, I wanted to tell you about the planes. Maybe it'll come back to me.
I was gonna ask you a question too about I got frozen at the same time you did well, anyway, so the stuff was going on. You mentioned that Donald Trump and Epstein are basically neighbors as well, right?
Down in Palm Beach, walking distance, yeah. Oh, yeah, well, I got one more thing for you, too. Another connection between Epstein. See, I remembered my thing. Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, but feel free to interrupt me if your thing comes back.
Yeah, go ahead.
We know, too, another connection between Epstein and Trump is that there's a photograph that has Prince Andrew at a tennis tournament at Mar-a-Lago, and there's a photograph that has Trump, Prince Andrew, and Epstein in the same photograph together. Now, the photograph isn't available on the internet. This was a photograph that was published in a magazine or a publication, and we have a caption from it. It came up in a DocuSearch search to find in publications. We found that, but no one could find the picture, though. But
yeah.
The picture,
that's an interesting thing. I remembered what I was going to ask is that you said Mossad was involved. And just for people who don't understand, why would Mossad be involved with somebody like Jeffrey Epstein and what he was up to with all these underage girls and the parties and so forth?
Well, good question. You know, why? Well, we know that one of the, I think it was Likud, one of the Israeli prime ministers was on Epstein's plane too as well. We know that from the flight logs. We know that. We know also, too, that in one of these search warrant affidavits that the Palm Beach police described finding videotaping equipment in Epstein's house. Although that doesn't show up on the search warrant video that we have. I have 2 videos of the execution of the search warrant at Epstein's mansion. It's on, again, OppermanReport.com. What do you call it? But with that, they don't show that room, but they describe it in their search warrant affidavit that they... and the probable cause affidavit that they found this room with videotape equipment in there. So the house was definitely cleaned up before they went in there with that video. That's for sure. So we believe that Epstein was involved in blackmail, and he even said too when Bill Clinton came to visit. Ghislaine the Virginia Roberts asked him, "Well, what's going on with that?" He says, "Well, now he owes me a favor." So that Epstein was filming people and blackmailing them, which seems to be how a lot of these people work.
Yeah, and it's a control mechanism, basically, right? That intelligence agencies use to have something on these people that then they can control them. And then Epstein was having parties with famous people. He was introducing them to these young girls. So It was all used, and he was fantastically wealthy too, and people didn't know where that was coming from. Isn't that right?
Yeah, it's his whole income thing is very mysterious as well. Epstein actually worked, came out of college, and he went to work at the Dalton School, which was like a middle school in Manhattan, where the little girls wore those Catholic school uniforms, and he taught, I think it was mathematics he taught over there, something like that. And he became friendly with one of the little girls, became like her mentor, and her father was head of, I think it was Goldman Sachs. I'd have to go back, and I don't have notes on this prepared, sorry.
It's okay.
But I've done a bunch of shows on it. And his father was a big hedge fund guy and brought in Epstein. And that's how Epstein went from being a school teacher and didn't even have credentials to do that. But Epstein came from like a Brooklyn high school, like one of those Welcome Back Kotter type high schools. I forget the name of it, but it was one of those real ghetto high schools. It wasn't this guy wasn't in finishing school or prep school or anything like that. Okay. And then he winds up a partner in this brokerage firm. I believe it was blackmail involved in that. And then next thing you know, he has one client, Leslie Wexler, who's the guy who owns Victoria's Secrets and the Limited and stuff like that. And that's interesting, too, in a way, because if you look at the Limited, they have a store front branch called the Limited 2, which is for little girls, little preteen girls, tweens. And I remember I used to take my daughter shopping there, and I'd say, what all this clothing is too provocative for a little girl. What's going on? Who would buy this for their daughters? This is crazy. But that's what the material that Leslie Wexler was selling. And Wexler sold the largest mansion townhouse in Manhattan. Leslie Wexler owned it and sold it to Epstein for $1, supposedly.
Oh, wow. So a lot of people are doing him favors, and then he's got his own plane. He's got his own island, and he comes from nothing, and nobody knows where all that came from. I guess he got a lucky job with Goldman Sachs at one point. But I know it was kind of mysterious where his wealth came from, and then we would assume that had to do with the stuff he was involved with, right? I mean, trafficking.
Yeah, Dershowitz says when Dershowitz is making excuses for his connection to all this, it was one of his last interviews, and he said, after this interview, I'm not going to do any more. Dershowitz says, the way I met Jeffrey Epstein at a party at Evelyn Rothschild's house. that's his,
Wow.
The guy's such a name dropper, he can't control himself. But that's how he's clearing his name, by bringing in the Rothschilds. It's all this,
Wow.
Yeah, I know, man. It's stranger than fiction. Let me tell you, this is stranger than fiction. You can't make this stuff up. And you got people who think that Trump and they're all rounding up pedophiles, and they're all there's a secret plan to round up elite pedophiles. Where he's best friends with one.
Yeah, that's where I was going. That's exactly where I was going next. And is that people would say that Donald Trump, and this has to do with QAnon too, is people would say that Donald Trump is here to round up these criminals, these arch criminals, even like the Rothschilds, and that if you just look out there are all these stories about how pedophile arrests are going on, and other stuff about CEOs stepping down, and all these sealed indictments. And what are your thoughts on that? What are your thoughts on people who say, look at what's going on, all these pedophile arrests? I hear that all the time.
Yeah, the 1,400 pedophile arrests that Liz Cronkin made up. She made that up. There is no way she got mixed up or confused. She made it up. Okay, she made that up. It was fantasy that she dreamed up in her head, and she made it up. That there were 1,400 pedophile arrests in the first 2 months of Trump's when he became president, after his inauguration, or after he entered the White House.
Go ahead.
Okay, I contacted the police officers that were involved in those operations, and those were all investigations that had gone on for 3 years previous before Trump had even announced he wanted to be president. This had nothing to do with Donald Trump whatsoever. Also, too, many of the cases she talks about, those 1,400 cases, were adults. These were adult prostitution cases. And they make a big thing about it. If you even watch the press conferences on it, you'll see the police say, oh, and Child Protective Services came in and rescued, I think it was like 40 kids or something like that were encountered along the way. Right. So then they take this and try and say, well, they were rescued 40 kids that were being trafficked. This big pedophile ring of 1,400 ring. But when you look into that, these were kids who worked, who lived with their parents, who got arrested, and then they were taken into foster care. There was no, maybe a couple were being trafficked and were saved, but actually no, it was that they were just a lot of more adults, and the other ones too were like those To Catch a Predator type things where they're on the internet.
Right.
Yeah. And then more recently, too, so the Kronkin just made that stuff up. And people, when I did my show about that, and I really researched that show before I went forward, because I says, everybody's talking about this 1,400. Let me see what's really going on here. So I call those cops so much that when I would call them back, they recognize my voice, okay? I was calling them up. And I said, listen, I just want to check one more time. Is this you again? Yeah, sorry, man, what? It's me again. I want to be careful. So anybody could call them up. I posted the phone numbers, what? It's not a secret. Anybody can call.
Right.
But the other one, too, was more recently where Sessions announced that there were 2,000 arrests. And again, too, this was low-hanging fruit. This was all cases where the people had made complaints online about their neighbors and their ex-husbands and their ex-boyfriends. Hey, this guy has child pornography, blah, blah, blah. And they went and followed up those cases and they made arrests. But it wasn't a ring. It wasn't a pedophile ring. These were all, and they even said that where they came from. The leads came from the 25,000 online complaints that finally someone got around to looking into and investigating. Because let me tell you something, man. You can make those online complaints all day long. No one checks that stuff out.
What do you think the chances are then, if you don't think anything's actually happening, why isn't anything happening? Is there a chance anything is going to happen? I mean, do you think Trump is going to do it? Do you have faith in Trump to get any of that done, or is it the opposite?
Exact opposite. If Trump wanted to round up pedophiles, he could round up, what's his name? Sly Stallone was right there in the White House right next to him, right? So was that other guy, too, Ted Nugent, right? These are pretty much guys who admit they're diddling 14, 15-year-old girls, right? Sly Stallone is on his way to being indicted right now. And Ted Nugent, pretty much admits it. How about Pruitt? Pruitt, the EPA manager, went to visit this guy. I'm doing a whole show about it this weekend. Who is this guy? Cardinal George Pell. We know that Pruitt went to visit, had a secret meeting with Cardinal George Pell just a few days before he was arrested for his lifelong child abuse allegations over there in Australia. Wow. But we found out now that there's all these investigations into Pruitt that the whole weekend was exclusively Pell was his tour guide. He had many, many meetings, lunches, dinners. The whole meeting was to meet with Pell. Wow. So if Trump is trying to round up pedophiles, they're his best friends, or rapists. These are his best friends. What about Roy Cohn? His mentor was Roy Cohn. And we had on our show Jim Rothstein, who was investigating Roy Cohn for the disappearance of 3 little boys that were buried on his property in Connecticut. Okay? So what more do you want? And Trump is hanging out there at Studio 54 where all that stuff is going. And he's hanging out with Adnan Khashoggi, who admitted human trafficking. He was trafficking Paul McCartney's wife, Heather Mills. So, Trump is around, his address book, his friends are pedophiles and human traffickers. These are his buddies, his rapists. You got pictures of Trump with Michael Jackson. Trump had a friendship with Mike Tyson, the rapist, convicted rapist.
It's a lot of evidence, and for somebody like me who's not a Trump supporter and kind of don't support really anybody in politics right now, it's easy for me to look at the connections you make and kind of not have faith that Trump is going to get anything done, and then actually be real suspicious about the kind of person he really is. But let me ask you, this will be the last thing. What about your politics? I hear you sometimes. You're into Bernie, right?
Yeah, I was into Bernie. And I'm a leftist, I was a socialist, a real socialist. I'm not a socialist like these new kids now are socialist. I'm a real, nationalize the oil industry kind of socialist, nationalize the different kind of industries, state bank kind of socialist.
Yeah. Well, and so do people accuse you all the time of supporting Hillary, or did they say you're bashing Trump because you're a lefty or any of that stuff?
Yeah, that's the first. Well, actually, they say that I'm a liberal when I'm pretty much conservative. I'm not. I believe in guns. I like most leftists, real leftists like guns. Okay, I
Right.
don't know about these Hillary supporters, but I'm against abortion. I don't believe in telling people what to do. But I personally, I wouldn't abort a baby if I didn't have to. So yeah, right away, I'm a liberal and I'm a Hillary supporter and I'm Obama. People bring up Obama. Like I never supported Obama, not even close. Listen, Bernie said a lot of the same things. And my theory with Bernie is that I didn't think he would get more than 10, 20% of the vote. But I says, well, it'll wake people up, when we can organize those people. But then when I started going to Bernie rallies and I started meeting the Bernie people, these were smart people. They knew what real socialism was. They understood the 99%. They understood the 1%. They understood their own interests. So I really respected these people and got to know them. Now, and I've supported other candidates here. I'm very involved in politics here locally, and my daughter was just an intern on a candidate for Congress, down here. And listen, Bernie kind of screwed us, in that he could have supported our candidate. Our revolution came down, supported her. But if Bernie had put her name on his mailing list, forget it, she would have had enough money. We would have won.
Mm-hmm.
And she's a legit candidate. She's a legit woman. Amy Valella, she's a legit, real candidate. But I'm not a leftist. I'm not a liberal. I'm not a Hillary. I'm not a Democrat for sure. I'm not a Democratic Party. And I've done so much. If you go back and look at all the shows I did exposing the Clintons and the work I did on the Clintons, that on the day, I don't know if I ever told you this story, but on the day of one of the debates, it was on the 19th, I think it was October 19th, when Trump had that surprise thing where he had Paula Jones and Kathleen Willey and all those.
Yep.
Right. Okay. I knew everybody in that room. Okay. I've had all those women on my show. I knew Paula Jones way before she even heard of Trump.
Right.
Because we had the same age. So that same day, right, I get a phone call from someone who had just gotten off the phone with Roger Stone, and they wanted me to give them Kathy O'Brien's phone number and contact information. They wanted Kathy O'Brien in that room.
Yeah, why is that they wanted Kathy O'Brien? I remember that story. Why would they want her? Does he?
She was raped by Clinton.
She was. Oh, she was too.
Yeah. She said
man.
No, she was raped by Hillary. She says.
Wow, how weird. And did you hand it over to him or no?
Oh yeah, I gave him the number. And then I says, hey, because I've known Giuliani. I've known Giuliani since he was running for mayor. I knew him back when the Pizza Connection trial and stuff like that. He was the prosecutor in the case, and I worked on the defense. Giuliani knows my name, So I said to the guy who had just gotten off the phone with Roger Stone. By the way, there's a Stone connection to Epstein too, by the way. But I had just gotten off he had just gotten off the phone with Roger Stone that contacted me to get Kathy O'Brien's contact information. So I says, yeah, sure, here it goes. But hey, listen. Check out all the shows I did on the Clintons. I have a whole playlist on YouTube of every show I did on the Clintons, about the Clinton Foundation, about all the murders. I found, and listen, man, I found Sally Miller, who was one of the women who had an affair with Clinton, who was, it came out with the Troopergate. She was in hiding. She was out of the public for 20 years, man. She hadn't done an interview or anything like that. A listener to my show knew her, says, hey, get on the show with Ed Opperman. He's a fun guy. I interviewed her, and she's the one that came on the show that said that Hillary had 2 abortions.
Wow.
I'm the guy that found that out. I found her. She was nowhere. And then she was interviewed by Russia TV, came down, like the real, not RT, the real Russian TV came down to her house and interviewed her. But
wow.
So I told the guy who was friends with Stone, I says, hey, man, show Trump all my shows. After that, Trump was reading off my stuff, man.
No way.
He went through his stuff about the Clintons, and it was right down the line in the sequence of my shows, the stuff he was talking about.
Wow.
So yeah, so people can't tell me I'm in the bag for Hillary, man.
Right. No, I believe you. Well, what you're political. So what are we going to do? There's elections coming up. What are you going to be doing?
Well, Bernie's going to run again. I can tell you that for a fact. We know. And I'm going to support Bernie. I'm going to continue organizing the youth that are attracted to Bernie's message and stuff like that. Last year, we traveled up and down the whole state of California with the Bernie campaign, covering the Bernie campaign. I broadcast the shows live. I broadcast Trump live.
Oh, that's cool. Do you think Bernie won California for real and got stolen from him? I voted for him.
I don't know about California, but we know for an absolute fact that the Hillary stole Nevada. We've done many shows on that. And I had, on my show just a couple of weeks ago, we had Kathleen Kramer, who was the head of the credentials committee here, who they tried to arrest her. We had her on the show live while she was sitting on the floor. They were trying to arrest her there. They got rid of her. The whole thing was rigged here in Nevada. Bernie won Nevada. They stole it right in our faces, man.
I know. I heard that was really crazy. And finally, actually, you mentioned Roger Stone's connected to Epstein. I think people want to know details about that.
Okay, you know who knows the details on that? You got to look up Pierce Redmond's Porkins policy. He's on my station till I play his show.
Yeah, right.
I don't have all the facts off the top of my head on that, but he was involved in Epstein was involved in this multi-level marketing scheme with this guy. By the way, one of the lawyers who is suing Epstein right now in all these cases was involved in that too. Okay.
Wow.
And they had this scheme where they were selling off. You could invest in lawsuits, and if the lawsuit won, you'd get a piece of the payoff at the end, right?
Interesting.
And Stone was involved in that, and the guy who was involved in that too also funded the search for a little I think it was either Casey Anthony or Kaylee Anthony or the other little girl that was down there, one of those little girls down in Florida that was missing, turned up missing. Anyway, he was involved in that, funding the search for one of those kids too. And one of those kids too, there's a whole bunch of theories that one of those kids was in child pornography, that there's pornographic photos of the kid.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so there's all that, but off the top of my head, I couldn't tell you.
You couldn't tell me the Roger Stone. Everybody wants to know about that.
Yeah, well, there's definitely a connection. Yeah, but Stone was involved in that investment scheme with Epstein's guy in the multi-level marketing scheme, involved in that thing with Stone was partners in that deal.
Man, Roger Stone's got his own shady background that everybody's wondering about too. All right, well, thanks for coming on my show. I think I got everything out of you, and we get you out of here on time. Finally, the thing that I was having you on for is because you're about to get maybe the best evidence that what the kids were saying at the McMartin Preschool case, that what they were saying is true, and that's government evidence of these tunnels being dug on the property next door, actually on the property where the school was. So for anybody who's interested in supporting that, I'm interested in supporting it. Go to oppermanreport.com or email Ed Opperman at oppermanreport@gmail.com to get a special price to sign up. And he's got a lot of evidence there behind his paywall, a lot of exclusive stuff. So thanks, Ed. Great having you on again.
Thank you, Nathan. I really appreciate you being so flexible about the time for me.
Yeah.
I really appreciate that.
No problem. I'll have you on whenever you'll have me.
Thank you, Nathan. Thank you very much.
All right, Ed. Talk to you later.
Good night.
Bye. Okay, great. That was a great interview. We had to squeeze him in a little bit early. Let me just say, I gave you how you can go to his website and sign up or email him. He'll give you a special price on that. I just thought it was worth supporting him because it is some interesting information that he's going to get. This show is sponsored by our merchandise clothing company, Truth Revolution Clothing at truthclothing.io. We make awesome t-shirts like this one. It says Truth Matters because that's what we're committed to, is bringing you guys the truth. So let me just show you our store real quick. Oh, and I can tell you about a coupon code that's available right now. So let me show you what the store looks like. This is Truth Revolution Clothing, truthclothing.io. Those are all the shirts we have, men's and women's styles. If you, for this 4th of July holiday, if you put a shirt in your cart and a Doshi production sticker in your cart, so with a shirt, you can get a Doshi production sticker by using the coupon code 4Doshi, the number 4 in Doshi. That's until that expires. We don't know for sure when it will. It's our first coupon code. We're doing it for 4th of July. We have interviews coming up. On Thursday, we're interviewing Jake Morphonios on this show at 1 p.m. Pacific time, 4 p.m. Eastern time. You can catch interviews like this on the podcast after the fact by searching Lift the Veil anywhere podcasts are given away for free, like iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher. You can find me on Twitch, and I'll tell you what, I'll keep rolling for a post show real quickly on Twitch just for a cool down. That is at twitch.tv/lifttheveil411. I appreciate everybody joining me for this interview. Like I said, on Thursday, I have Jake Morphonios coming on at 1 p.m., and he will be taking phone calls as well. So make sure to tune in on time for that interview as you were on time today. So for YouTube and continuing over on Twitch for a little bit, for me and Doshi, that is what it is.